So I want to really welcome everybody to the final program of Conscious Capitalism Twin Cities for 2020. I'm David Craig Utts. I'm the principal and founder of David Craig Utts Leadership, and also honored to be on the leadership team of the Conscious Capitalism Twin Cities chapter. We really appreciate you showing up tonight. And we were talking as a leadership team how appreciative. We've all had bright spots in 2020, I know, but there have been fewer and far between for all of us because of all the changes. And one of the bright spots for us is this community and the ability to be able to bring programming and to support you all and your businesses and being more conscious and just having you in our lives. So thank you for joining us tonight. And we're going to have an amazing program for our last program for the year. In September, we did a program on conscious marketing. And we were actually going to do conscious marketing and conscious selling together, but the topics are so huge, we decided to separate them. And we did a great program with the American Marketing Association of Minneapolis. And tonight we're going to focus on conscious selling. So again, the question we want to answer tonight is, what is conscious selling? What has to happen for you to engage conscious selling in your companies? And as I said, we have a great cast of people that are going to support us to look at that whole topic tonight. First and foremost is Lisa McLeod and Elizabeth Lotardo, who are authors of Selling with Noble Purpose. And they're going to kick us off with a short talk that's going to set the stage for the conversation. Then we're going to be joined by Jason Jones of the Coaching Hour, who's developed a conscious selling system that's really the nuts and bolts of how do you engage others in the buyers in conversations in a way that has them want to enjoy the conversation and enjoy the buying process. And then we're also going to be joined by Nancy Pautsch, who's the president of Envision, who is the one that is doing this in her company and has been doing it for years with great results. And we're going to get to listen about how she does that and what's happened for her organization through applying what she's learned from Lisa and Elizabeth and others in the conscious selling process. And what I want to do is also highlight that, we're going to be talking about the tenets of conscious capitalism. So I want to bring that up a little bit and talk a little bit about the background of conscious capitalism. I know many of you already are aware of that, but the conscious capitalism was really born out of a book that was published in 2007, Firms of Endearment. Now, the authors of Firms of Endearment did not realize they were going to start a whole movement. And yet the book was really what I would call Good to Great 2.0. It was a research book on brands like Southwest, Starbucks, Costco, Caterpillar, and other beloved brands. And the authors wanted to know what made these brands so sticky, so enjoyable to those that engaged them, and why they were so beloved to their customers. And what they discovered in it was the fundamental birthplace of conscious capitalism. And one of the authors, Raj Sisodia, who's from Harvard Business School, joined John Mackey of Whole Foods and published another book in 2013, Conscious Capitalism. And what they did is they pulled 4 tenets out of Firms of Endearment and made it very clear. And if we could bring those tenets up now, these 4 tenets. And what they said is these companies did is they started with higher purpose, that they really looked at the real why behind their business, beyond making a profit, and what drove them into creating their business models. They also recognized the value and importance of having conscious leadership in the continuous growth and development of conscious leadership, as well as a conscious culture or a context or an environment in which they could uplift and inspire others to bring their best to work in service of the purpose. And finally, that there was a real orientation to not just serving a few stakeholders like shareholders, clients, and employees, but all stakeholders, including the community that surrounded the business. And so now we have many business leaders around the world, hundreds of them, engaging and embracing this methodology and this focus to build more conscious business. And when when Conscious Capitalism was first published, they had no idea about chapters. They weren't thinking about having chapters anywhere. And then they started getting calls. And because they're a conscious organization, they listen to their customers. We now have close to 35 chapters in just 7 years all around the world that are supporting businesses, government agencies, and nonprofits to work together to create a more conscious business environment. And the purpose of conscious capitalism is to elevate humanity through business. I will say, even in the last 2 years, there's been a tremendous uptick in interest. And with 2020, even more so. People are recognizing business can be a force for good that can solve a lot of the problems we are facing. And this model of conscious capitalism is really the backbone for making all that happen. So that's that. And I want to say that there's a way in which we really would appreciate, you can be involved with our chapter and become part of conscious capitalism. There's an individual membership that has many benefits, like these quarterly events. The CEO breakfast that is coming up will be starting in 2021. There's a training called Conscious Capitalism 101 that gives you all the basics and nuts and bolts of how to build a conscious business, as well as other benefits. And there's also corporate membership that is available to you as well with additional benefits. And so that's an opportunity for you to get involved. And we want to really thank this year. What we decided to do as a chapter, because of what we've been through, is we didn't want to charge anything for these events. We wanted to put on high quality events as a gift to our community. And really, we were able to do that because of the amazing sponsors that we have. And here they are. We have Improving, that's really been Improving and Envision, that have really been the backbone of getting us starting. And then we have Salveo Partners and also Global Tax Network. And because of their support this year, we've been able to do this programming for no charge to you. And we want to just really thank our sponsors for everything they've done to make that happen for us. So the focus for tonight is on conscious selling. So let me put a scenario in your mind right now. Imagine you're just about to you just get a phone call. And the number is familiar enough that you think you have to pick it up. You don't want to break away from this amazing program, but you do, and you pick it up because it could be a family member or whatever. And all of a sudden, you hear the person on the other end of the phone you recognize as a salesperson who tries to engage you in a conversation around some need they assume you have, right? We've all had those calls. And I would ask you, how do you feel right now? Uplifted, excited, or you feel a little frustrated and irritated that happened? Well, for many years, we've trained sales professionals in a certain way and oriented sales, the sales function in an organization, to, even though they don't say it, it's about what we're presenting to you, what we're trying to deliver to you, and why that's so great. It's been a presenting focus, a presenting orientation. And this has created some of the reactions we have to salespeople today. But we wanted to, and what we're trying to do in a conscious selling approach is change all that so people welcome a conversation with a salesperson. So let's talk about some of the things that we would say are just as a highlight. I'm not trying to steal the thunder from the speakers or the panelists, but just so that we have a context for what conscious selling is. The primary purpose is to elevate the relationship with the prospect or client or buyer by deepening trust, understanding needs, and generating real value for them. And conscious selling aligns with the tenets of conscious capitalism. So there's purpose behind it, as you'll hear from Lisa and Elizabeth soon, and Jason. And the emphasis of the salesperson is to serve the needs of the prospect and client over the need to get the sale. And the conscious selling approach aligns with research that we've discovered from social sciences, behavioral sciences, and neuroscience that illuminates how human beings like to buy instead of doing it a way we think it should be done, which is the way a lot of things have been built up till we had this research available to us. And a conscious approach also inspires and empowers salespeople to be of service to those they engage. So those are the high level focuses of what conscious selling is and what it entails. But we will now hear from Lisa McLeod and Elizabeth Lotardo about what they say about that. And I want to introduce the two of them right now. Great honor to introduce them. Now, Lisa is a global expert on purpose-driven business. and the best-selling author of Selling with Noble Purpose, How to Drive Revenue and Do Work That Makes Us Proud. Lisa spent 2 decades helping leaders increase competitive differentiation and emotional engagement, critical factors to building great cultures. And her work really debunks the whole myth that money is the primary motivation to most employees. And she launched McLeod and More in 2001. She now helps leaders like Cisco, Roche, Volvo, Dave & Buster's drive exponential revenue growth. And she's a delight to hear. And then we have Elizabeth Lotardo, who's also joining, who is a member of Lisa's organization, a researcher, co-author of the new Selling with Noble Purpose. And she also is a VP of Services at Sales Leadership Consultancy with Lisa. And she leads sales transformational initiatives all over the world, including with Oracle, G Adventures, and FishServe. She is a really popular LinkedIn author, learning author, so look for her there. And she has been featured in the Wall Street Journal and NPR, as has been Lisa. They've been very visible in the media as experts. And we just really are glad to have you here and really want to thank you for giving us your time tonight and kicking off the event. It's all yours.
Well, thanks, David. Welcome, everyone. You could see the airbrushed version of our faces. Here's us in real life. You can tell we're rocking the COVID long hair for a bit here. We're really excited to be with you all today. To start us off, I'd like to pass over to Lisa to give us all a little bit about the Selling with Noble Purpose background, how what was intrinsic for a lot of people became very explicit, as David had mentioned. And we'll, beyond that, dive into how we can really live these practices in the cadence of daily sales.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So, in the last 10 years, purpose has become a hot topic, but there is one place that purpose has yet to get traction for the most part, and it's sales. Because as David said, the idea of selling and noble, higher ideals, they don't seem to go together, because we have this belief that sales is just about the money and hitting the number. But I did a research project 10 years ago that told a very different story, and that's how Selling with Noble Purpose was born. So I want to share that with you. So as you heard, I'm a sales consultant. And about a decade ago, a big biotech company hired my firm to identify what differentiated the top performers in their sales team. So they wanted us to do a research study. If you've had spent any time in sales or any type of where you had P&L or revenue responsibility, you know that the difference between the good performers and the poor performers is very easy to spot. It's a discernible set of skills. Everyone's been to sales training at some point. They teach that. But what's harder to put your finger on is the difference between the good performers and the exceptional performers. And you've seen, probably if you're here on this Conscious Capitalism call, you've seen a lot of the research about companies and performance over the long haul. But one of the great things in sales is we get a monthly report on short-term performance. And so what this company saw was that the same people were consistently at the top in terms of sales numbers, and they wanted to know why. But here's the interesting thing. This was a biotech company, a science-based company. And so they went about this study in an interesting way. The other researchers and I did not know who the top performers were. All we knew is that we had this bucket of people that we were going to go out in the field and work with. And we didn't have any poor performers. It was just good and exceptional. So we go in the field, we observed these salespeople making their sales calls. We did in-person interviews with them. We had our little clipboards, and you can imagine how excited they were to have researchers following them around. Looking at how many questions did they ask, what was their product knowledge, all of these things. And it's all in search of that elusive, magical thing that makes the top performers the top performers. So we were near the end of the study, and I was with this one representative in Phoenix, Arizona. We'd been together for 2 days. It was the summer. They say it's dry heat in Phoenix. It's still 110 degrees. We're sitting in her car, and I'm about to get out of the car to hoof it up to the airport. And I've been like in and out of air conditioning all day. She called on doctors, hospitals. So like my suit is like stuck to my back, it's just, and I'm sitting there in the car and I think, I'm taking that breath in the air conditioning. And I decided to ask her a question that wasn't on our list of questions. I said, what do you think about when you go on sales calls? What's in your brain? And I'll never forget her answer. She said, I always think about this one particular patient. She said, I don't tell us very many people. I'm thinking, okay. She said, I always think about this one grandmother. She said, I was early in my career with this company. It's about 3 years ago. I was standing in a doctor's office. I had my name badge with my, company name and the drug on it. And this little old lady comes up to me, taps me on the shoulder and says, excuse me, miss, are you the representative for that drug? She said, I looked down at her and said, yes, ma'am, I am. She said, well, I just want to thank you. She said, the little old lady looked up at me and said, I want to thank you for giving me my life back. Because prior to taking this, I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything. Now I can get on a plane. I can fly across the country. I can get down on the floor and play with my grandkids. So thank you. And so as this rep is telling me this story, she's getting emotional and she says, I think about her every single day. That's my purpose. That's why I do my job. Difficult doctor, I push through. Challenging healthcare system, I make the extra effort. And so she said, that's my purpose. And this is a decade ago. People were not talking about this. So I get out of the car, hoof it up to the airport, and I fly back to Atlanta. It's a long flight. I had plenty of time to think. And I just kept turning it over and over in my mind. And I thought, this thing, this sense of higher purpose, is that the magic thing? Is that the thing? So I went back and I looked through all the interviews and I found it in the anecdotal comments. There were a couple of reps who, when asked about their background, said things like, well, my dad was a doctor. I want to make the doctor's life easier. I'm excited about the science. All told, there were 5 people that alluded to this sense of higher purpose. And so we get to the end of the study. The biotech company says, so what'd you learn? And the key question was, who do you think the top performers are? Because again, this is a blind study. And I said, well, I think it's these 5. And you look around the room, back when we used to be in rooms together, and their jaws are about to drop. They said, those are our 5 top people. How did you know? And that's where the story gets not as good. So first, I got to tell you, if you've worked in medical at all, the people who run a big biotech company are scientists and finance people. So I'm saying, I think these are the top 5. And they say, how did you know? So I got a room full of scientists and finance people. I say, well, they had this sense of higher purpose. Okay, what do you mean by that? So then I proceed. Well, they had a different story in their heart. If you ever have one of those meetings where you're like, blah, 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 and your words are just sliding out on the table. Because 10 years ago, I could not articulate what I since came to call noble purpose. But it was a moment. I knew I had seen something. I knew it was real. And I knew that if we could find a way to scale this, we could make magic. So what I didn't know at the time was to take the better part of a decade to figure that out. Good thing I didn't know. But nonetheless, we persevered. And what we found in subsequent studies that proved to be true, what I just saw in that first one, is salespeople who have this sense of noble purpose, who truly want to make a difference to customers, outsell salespeople focused on targets and quotas. And what we found was that while noble purpose is innate to the top performers, it's not limited to them. It is something, they do have a different story in their hearts, but you can put that story into everyone's heart and you can scale it and you can measure it. And it plays out in the way they interact with customers, which translates into the economics. So I'm going to flip to Elizabeth now, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the economic implications of what happens when a firm adopts a noble purpose and they activate it in their sales team.
Thanks, Lisa. So I'm Elizabeth Lotardo. I work on Lisa's team and I have a background in organizational psychology. And one thing you should know about me is I'm a little bit of a skeptic. So when I heard that story, I, much like the scientist, thought, okay, sounds a little floofy, but okay, maybe if you're in pharma, I'd love to see how that plays out in other organizations across more industries with a wider pool of salespeople. And what we found in the data is that this same principle, the people who sell with noble purpose, who are so laser-like focused on the impact they make on customers, they outsell transactional salespeople, regardless of the product, regardless of the industry, regardless of their tenure as salespeople. I'm going to share a little bit of data with you here. If you see me looking on my other screen, that's where the slides are. So I promise I'm paying attention. But these are 3 points that I found so interesting when we think about purpose from a revenue generating perspective. Organizational growth being number 1. We've seen a ton of data coming out. This particular study is from a Procter & Gamble, former Procter & Gamble CMO, I think, Jim Stingle. And he found in his book, Grow, that organizations who are centered on a purpose, who truly wanted to improve life for their customers, outperformed the S&P by over 350% over the course of several years. Some new research from Michigan State University that just came out last year by Dr. Valerie Good found that salespeople who were connected to that sense of purpose demonstrated more resilience, and they put forth more effort over time compared to their transactional counterparts. If there's anything to be said about 2020 is that it is a year of resilience. And then, of course, Lisa's foundational study in Selling with Noble Purpose, the first edition, found that the people who put purpose at the fore and really are connected emotionally to the positive impact they're making on their customers are more likely to achieve the financial results that they're looking for. And what we're seeing now is purpose has hit this mainstream movement. What lived in the heart and mind of a lot of us conscious capitalism folks has become front page on most business publications. We know, based by a huge body of research, that organizations who take this approach outperform the transactional approach in the long run. The challenge is taking all of this stuff around finding your purpose and purpose and profit coming together and having this stakeholder model and actually applying it in the cadence of day-to-day business and applying it in sales specifically, because we know that's one of the best opportunities to demonstrate the return of purpose-driven business. It's also one of the most challenging parts of having a purpose-driven business because sales is so quantitative in nature. And the natural pull is to pull you back to daily pipeline reports and pull you into internally looking metrics instead of keeping that customer impact at the fore of your mind and at the fore of customer conversations. So just to give us a little bit of context before we dive into this panel, we've been hearing a lot about how people are reevaluating their priorities, how businesses are changing at a rapid speed, how employees want different things, how customers want different things. So what I would put to the group is the slide, why now? The concurrent crises that we're in have demonstrated the existing way, the transactional way of doing business is not sustainable. It is not sustainable for employees and it is not sustainable for customers. Both of those groups are called to a higher purpose. And it is our core belief that that higher purpose is not in conflict with revenue production. It is linked to revenue production. The more positive impact you have on your customers, the more value you're bringing to them, the more likely you are to obtain your quota. That is what we've seen play out in our own firm. That is what we have seen play out in our research. And that is what has played out with our clients. So as we dive into this conversation, I would ask everyone to pause what may be a false dichotomy in your mind between purpose and profit and know that this is rock solid backed in research. We absolutely have clarity now, unlike this feeling in their heart conversation 10 years ago, that selling with a noble purpose is an approach that is effective for a person to feel more engagement. It's also effective in demonstrating revenue for an organization. So with that, I'd love to get started on our panel.
Great. Thank you, Nancy and Lisa. That was a wonderful introduction. And, now we're going to be joining a panel. There'll be 2 people joining our panel. Like you'll see Jason Jones and Nancy Pautsch, and I'll introduce them in a second. And I want to just let you know that we will be taking questions from the audience after this is over. But if you got one hot and you want to put it in, go ahead and put it in the chat box, and we'll see if we can get to it. Maybe Addie can keep an eye on that and see if we can get to that as we go through here. But let me go ahead and introduce these 2 other amazing people that are joining us tonight. Jason Jones is a communication and sales coach and speaker who's committed to developing sales team and small business owners to create an amazing buying experience for their clients with his adaptive conversation selling system. He started his first business at the age of 16, which paid through his college and set his entrepreneurial mindset forward. His previous coaching and training company went global in 2 years and now serves in the US, Canada, Australia, and the UK. And his previous startup ventures involved communications media and entertainment, including a #1 radio show and talk show on WCCO. And you'll know he's from the radio when he starts talking, because he really has that voice, and he's a good friend of mine, and I'm real glad to have him here. And Nancy Pautsch is on our leadership team at Conscious Capitalism Twin Cities, and also Conscious Capitalism Chicago. She's a busy lady. And she calls herself the Evangelist of Stakeholder Value at Envision. And Envision is an amazing company that has really been a laboratory for firms of endearment and conscious capitalism, and shows how powerful the model works. Envision's mission is to enrich the lives of their stakeholders. Their business technology consulting is focused on optimization, helping to ensure that technology is an enabler to employee engagement and business success. Go figure, put those two together, right? That's awesome. And she has enjoyed 7 times the growth in top level revenue and 50% improvement in profitability. And she'll maybe talk more about her sales numbers and how a more conscious approach has impacted her revenue growth. And much of this is due to really just Nancy, who she is as a leader. We had the great fortune of getting to know her. She's a stellar human being, as is everybody on this panel, of course. So welcome you all to the panel. And I want to go for my first question, which I'm going ahead and ask of Jason. And, given what you heard Lisa and Elizabeth talk about, at the highest level, why do you believe it's in an organization's interest to adopt a more conscious selling system like adaptive conversation selling system, or selling on noble purpose? I mean, after all, sales are happening, aren't they? Why should we change? So what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, the environment for selling into has changed dramatically in the last 20 years, and that's been pointed out by others as well. But the approach to selling hasn't. And what I really hear Lisa and Elizabeth really bringing out and making tangible and malleable is putting emotions at the forefront, rather than, emotions are so inconvenient, let's put them off to the side and ignore them and just drive through, right? Let's go and bulldoze these folks and see which ones we get and which ones we don't. And people have less and less and less patience. Technology has emerged to avoid bulldozing. And by putting emotions to the forefront, that means actually listening, understanding, and synthesizing with your clients, so that you're an asset that's coming to support and be with them. Even if it's not happening in a sale, even if this is part of the relationship developing that can lead to a sale, that your interaction is going to bring some value, versus, it's a pitch, I don't have time for a pitch, nobody has time for a pitch. And that's what I really, really hear. It's that everybody's the customer comes first, now go get them, close them, and so it's no, it's we break that dichotomy. Really, what is going on? Those customers feel cared for, they experience the company as care for me, right? And matter, which then all leads to the buying decision and who they want to work with, which is the ones that really actually show up like they care about them.
Yeah, great, thanks, Jason. I want to kind of have Nancy continue with that and think about, you've been selling consciously, your organization has been selling consciously for years. And what have been the main benefits, as well as what were the growing pains into that? Or, you may have just launched into that, but would you say that there are any growing pains or shifts that as people came in as salespeople to your organization? I'm sure there's a selection process that was involved in that. But were there any challenges and hiccups along the way that you had to address? So both the results and that.
Yeah, and thank you, David, by the way. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here with these greats, my goodness. So I think it starts, and with Elizabeth and Lisa's book, with Selling with Noble Purpose, I think something that's so important in that, along with the conscious capitalism movement, and I know, Jason, you've talked about this too, is really starting with, the higher purpose of the organization, right? Before we even get into sales, it's most effective when it's throughout the organization. So, starting with that higher purpose, and then really having folks join professional sales, sales professionals that are intrinsically motivated, right, or inspired by that higher purpose, that they truly believe it and authentically believe it. And then, the other thing I think that, Jason, I know you can speak to, I know Elizabeth, you and Lisa have spoken this too, is really have professional salespeople being, self-aware, emotionally intelligent, adopting the growth mindset, or I should say exemplifying the growth mindset, right? And with all of those things, to your point, Jason, comes empathy, right? And really understanding how your products or services can benefit a qualified prospect, a qualified candidate. And I think so much that comes into that then is the qualification process. Because if a sales professional is going to authentically provide their goods and services to someone, it really is important that they recognize that that client, that prospect who would be client, would genuinely, with significant impact, right, be better off with their goods and services than without. Right. So to your point, David, I think, and then, by the way, well, let me go back to, are there challenges? Yes, we've had challenges, sure. And I think, what then it's up to us to learn from them. Right. But I think sometimes folks might join that think they're inspired by the purpose, but maybe have, stuck in their old ways. Right. Sometimes folks are still motivated by only the money. Right. And I think that's really important is, as we're qualifying sales professionals as well. And sometimes, again, that can be very innocent on the sales professional side. Right. Sometimes that motivation, where are the motivations and what's stronger? So I think that's interesting. But that's just learning along the way. I think qualifying is really important too. Right. Sometimes and this is natural for all sales professionals through the years, right? They have rose-colored glasses. They sometimes want to see what they want to see. And I think it's really important when you have sales folks that they adopt also that stakeholder perspective, right? Because if they sell something that is doomed to start, right? Ultimately, maybe they're putting their fellow employees in not the best circumstances, right? So, taking that whole stakeholder, certainly the client, but then also your fellow employees, right? You don't want to set them up for failure. So I think all of those things come into play with that. But one thing you mentioned, David, there's certainly the number side of it. The revenues and the profits are a benefit. But I think what's really interesting is when organizations can do this from top to bottom. And listen, nobody's perfect. I always say perfection is pure fiction, right? But when you can do that, when the organization has a higher purpose, right? When you have the stakeholder orientation, you have conscious leadership and a conscious culture, right? What's really interesting from the sales organization then, because I think those are really important to empower and really equip, I guess, a conscious selling organization, right? With all of that, you have to support folks to be able to do that. I think it's really interesting to see, even beyond the numbers, what can happen. Because if you think about it, reps that are inspired by the purpose, they know that they're helping their clients, they qualify effectively. So what they are envisioning can happen actually happens, right? And then your clients can recognize recognize the benefits. And again, with that conscious culture, you're delivering with quality. You likely have more engaged employees. At Envision, we're very blessed. We have 100% employee engagement. So folks care about what they're doing. They believe that everything they're doing has important meaning. And then ultimately you deliver quality stuff to your clients. You have happy clients. Happy clients help your reputation. They likely tell other companies, which then result in referrals, rinse and repeat. Right. And that's not no one should conclude then, oh, well, then selling's easy. Right. that's not the conclusion. Right. But it's just kind of that ripple of goodness. And if your sales team are oftentimes the first face of the organization, because as we know, buyers these days do so much of their research on their own. right? That they're likely not engaging a sales rep until they're about 70% down the buying cycle. So that sales rep that's representing your organization, gosh, hopefully they're authentic and they're doing it for the right reasons, which is really the stakeholder perspective. So does that answer your, that's a really long-winded answer to your question.
Good, it was a good answer. And I want to actually ask off of that, Lisa and Elizabeth, because you know, all of you are pioneers in this area that are on the panel. That's why we selected you tonight. But pioneers have to put up with, you know, the front of that resistance to change. So when CEOs are calling you in, and I'll let you two decide who, I want you both to hear from both of you, but whoever wants to start. What is it that you have to address with that business leader, or maybe it's the senior sales leader, to test their readiness for this and their willingness to make some shifts? It's going to take some coaching and a lot of change and a different focus. So whatever you want to say about that. Anything else you want to say?
So I do get that from CEOs, and oftentimes it's a senior sales leader who's put me in front of the CEO. So the question, I'll tell you the question, then how I answer it. And the question is, but isn't it important that they hit their number? Isn't the number the most important thing? Because that's what the CEO gets evaluated on. The CEO, whether they're a publicly traded company, whether they've got a board. And so what I usually do is I ask the CEO, do you ever have salespeople call on you? They usually say yes, consultants, other people. And I say, so imagine two people are calling on you. One person, before they called on you, has heard in their ear, close it, close it, close it, get the deal, get the revenue. And they are coming in looking at you, thinking you represent $200,000 to their company and they want to close it. And the other person has heard something different. They have heard your job is to go deliver a 10X to this customer. Your job is to make a difference. Your job is to find out what the CEO needs and how we can help them. Which of those two people would you rather have calling on you? Well, it's pretty obvious. We can turn your team into person number two. In order to do that, what you have to understand is the numbers matter. They are a lagging indicator. So if you had the noble purpose of curing cancer, you wouldn't be all loosey-goosey about the science. You'd be pretty damn serious. And so if your purpose, while the stakeholder piece is really crucial, where most sales teams miss it is lack of specificity on how they're going to make a difference to customers. Because they use the language, I taught sales training for years, go be customer focused. You know, Jason said it, go be customer focused, pay attention to the customer. But what you need to do with your purpose is define your lane and your aim. So you need to define, one of our clients said, we help make small businesses more successful. It's not the sexiest thing in the world, but if every seller is showing up saying, how can I help this business be more successful? It repointed them. So that's what I usually do with the CEO is say, who would you rather have call on you? And then Elizabeth probably says something else after me.
Lisa certainly takes a diplomatic approach. I think as this purpose conversation does become mainstream, the question we as a firm are better able to answer is not should I or should I not operate this way? It's the how do I operate this way? Because the body of research is indisputable to this point. I said the other day, if you are denying this business model and denying that employee engagement matters and denying that salespeople who sell with client impact at heart have better conversations, there's probably not a lot I can do to change your mind, right? If HBR can't do it and if Fortune can't do it, I'm not the woman for the job there. But what we can answer is how do I cultivate this sense of purpose? And I see a question in the chat here around how does leadership need to change to better support the conscious capitalism and noble selling process? I think Lisa gave a great answer to that in her response of saying the leader, be it a CEO, be it a frontline sales manager, has to keep the voice of customer impact as alive and pronounced as they do the target. Because we know when that voice starts to get a little too quiet, our likelihood of hitting that target decreases dramatically. So the role of leadership is to amp that back up, because the cadence of daily business, especially in sales, will try and pull it back.
Well, the thing I want to draw attention to that Elizabeth said here is so important, and you all have put different language around this, but customer impact, that is very different. Selling with noble purpose is not about pleasing customers, it's about improving customers. And this is a really big difference, because if I go in to please customers, and everyone talked about, we're going to be customer centric, which is great than saying we're going to be self-absorbed jerks, but being customer centric lacks the specificity, and it can make you very reactive, because a lot of people say, well, if you do what the customer wants, don't you end up selling, lower margin deals? No. And I see you guys shaking your head, so I want you to comment on this. It's about customer impact and improving the customer in measurable ways. So the act of the sales process, that alone should improve the customer, because as Nancy said, they've already done 70% of their buying journey before you showed up. So if you're just pitching products, forget it. So the sale should improve the customer. And then after the sale, again, it's not just pleasing, it's about measurably improving your customer. And that's something salespeople can get excited about. So I'd be curious as to the others' take on that difference. It's a kind of a nuance, but it's actually kind of distinct as well.
Well, Nancy and Jason speak to that. Be great.
Yeah, Jason, do you want to go ahead? I'll
Yeah,
follow
I
you.
can make I basically comment on kind of what comes to me like really first, which goes back to an approach of synthesizing the information with the client to better understand. So, the attitude toward, well, if you're just pleasing the client is just taking whatever information the client gives you and saying, okay, well, I will twist myself into a pretzel to be that. Will you buy if I do that? That doesn't actually bring value to the client. What brings value to the client is being knowledgeable. And then with that lens of knowledge, listen to what the client is saying, being listening first, understanding first, seeking to really be clear, confirming, being like I need to be really crystal clear on what's going on in that customer's head and how they're feeling and what they're experiencing, the pressure they have. Now I'm actually in a position that I can speak to their real needs, their real motivations, and what really matters to them, and tune in. And just that experience of actually being heard is a big differentiator. I mean, if your sales team is really hearing, really giving the people the experience of being heard, it's going to be that's a totally different kind of sales experience the person will have, right? Because it's been demonstrated both scientifically and anecdotally that when people are really heard, they speak clear, they think clear, and value rises in the conversation, right? It's we're going to cut deals, we're just going to give them the cheapest. The value of whatever's being offered increases as the value of the experience in that sales conversation increases, and the alignment of the solution to the problem, so that client experiences, wow, you zeroed in on exactly what I need, because you took the time to synthesize and work it out together to make that ideal match. That increases the value. There is no other mechanism that will make that decrease in value. That will increase that value. And so it's to the pleasing comment, that's just absence of listening. That's the old model of, I gave my pitch, what do you think?
Right. Right.
And then the conversation is just all about what they thought of the pitch, which isn't really going to advance it forward without you knowing what's going on in the client's head.
I've told you what I think of me. Now let's talk about what you think of me.
Right.
Nancy, I mean to jump on you.
Well, no, but to echo what Jason's saying, God gave us two of these, one of these, right? If professional salespeople actually use those in that proportion. And, I mentioned earlier kind of the qualifying, right? Qualifying to see if you can truly add value to their circumstance, right? Can you improve their circumstance? Can you help the client achieve their objectives authentically? Can you really do that? And to your point, Jason, and the coaching hours methodology, I think, is really helpful there if salespeople can follow it, because it helps them truly remember to ask those questions, work with a client, right? Together, not us against each other, but together collaboratively to help
Mhm.
clients sometimes better define or clarify their needs or their objectives or their preferences, right? Sometimes clients don't know, or they think they know, right?
Mhm.
But a professional a sales professional should be able to help truly bring those out and help define and clarify or identify to start, right? And that is so important because again, you want to sell with true effectiveness, meaning after the fact,
Mhm.
have impact
Yeah.
business in a positive way, right? And that's so important. So that's where that qualifying, I think we see so many times stereotypical or traditional, or if we want to say old school, I don't know how to say it, but I want to say it in all full respect of, kind of from some old selling methodologies, especially when reps are just driven by a number, right? Or the coin operated, which I think is so insulting. When they say salespeople are coin operated, that just drives me nuts. But anyway, is when they see in their qualifying efforts, when they see kind of a yellow light, slow down. Don't do what you drive. Don't speed on through it, because that's not gonna, or what many people do when they drive. But really slow down and ask more questions and delve deeper so you don't step in the muck later. So, yeah.
Oh, and this is really great. I said a lot of context. I think sometimes stories actually tell kind of can bring it together. So I'm wondering if you can all think of a story of a sales professional you worked with, and certainly Lisa, you did that already. I'm sure you have tons of stories about where the light went on and what that did for their impact in their organization. Or if you want to speak to a sales manager and either one of those, because I think stories kind of bring all this home that you're speaking about, and then we'll get back into the nuts and bolts and the approach. That would be great. So maybe Elizabeth, you could start with that one, or great.
Well, I think, we've shared a lot of the quantitative data here about how purpose impacts revenue growth, how it impacts employee engagement, quota attainment. But to me, the most transformative stories are those of the frontline sellers who at times often felt very coin operated by the way they were treated, and recognizing that they have a noble profession, that this is more than a paycheck. And I think seeing that awareness come to life in people is truly magical. We do an exercise called impact mapping with clients where you take your core job at the center of a piece of paper and you branch out little spokes about all the ways you make a difference. And then from that first tier, you go even further to how does that make a difference? How does that make a difference? All in search of, your biggest ripple of your ripple effect. And watching people view their jobs that way, especially if they had worked for a previously very transactional organization, is an incredible thing to witness. And I think those people carry that purpose with them through, all the turbulent times that is 2020. We saw in the research that these sellers experience much greater resiliency. Being able to tether to something more than a paycheck is what enables that.
So I'll tell you a story about a sales manager, and I'll use his name because he's in the book, Selling with Noble Purpose, and his name is Kurt Schreiner. He's the VP of Sales of Atlantic Capital Bank, and he's a great guy. And one of the questions was, what can leadership do? So I'll tell you exactly what he did and what it did for him. So great guy, sense of purpose was implicit in the business. They were always all in for their clients, but they wanted to make it more explicit. So he started doing two things, only two things, and it changed the way he experienced his people and the way they acted with clients. So the first thing he started doing was at their weekly sales meeting, he said, I'm going to ask for a customer impact story. Who made a difference to a customer this week? And they started telling the stories at the start of the meeting, just one or two stories. He said, the brain science kicked in. I watched their frontal lobes light up. I watched them lean into it. And so we kept our purpose alive. And theirs is we fuel prosperity through the rest of the meeting. And the other thing he did was we taught him what we call the game-changing question, which is when you're doing account review with a seller and a deal's on the table, which is when everybody gets all excited and starts talking about the money, ask one question. Ask all your normal, when's it going to close, blah, 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 who's the competition, what are we selling, all those things. but ask, how will the customer be different as a result of doing business with us? How will the customer be different as a result of doing business with us? He said, when I started asking my sales people that question, I watched that whole pop-up window of the deal that was dominating their thinking. He said, I could watch their brain like go like this. He said, and it changed it. He said, in the beginning, they didn't have very good answers. He said, so that tells me if they can't answer it for me, they're not going to be able to answer it for the customer. He said, now they know, don't bring Kurt a deal unless you can answer. How will the customer be different? He said, I'm 55 years old. This lit a fire under me. I'm seeing like new life in my team. They ended up being voted the best place to work. The CEO was on the cover of American Banker. And is literally, those were two of the things that he did that like just changed everything. And so if you're listening to this, like these don't cost you anything. You can do those like today. And it was really exciting to see, because you don't think of bankers as, something that makes your heart beat faster, but it did.
Great. Jason and Nancy, any thoughts on stories for you on?
I could offer a quick story. I work with a lot of coaches, and this is a short story. But what this speaks to, though, is the power of persuasion that is in a question and is in your questions. Questions are invitations for people to think about something. Telling has like a great pitch has really only so much influence. And as a salesperson, you have a limited amount of influence anyway coming in. This is that over-exercising of authority, right? And leaning into questions. I was working with a coach who was introducing a new program, and she had sent out a whole bunch of emails and kind of blitzing about it and about how great it was, and wasn't getting any response. Like people, it was all about relationships and people how to deepen their relationships with their spouses, their partners, and that sort of thing, because that was her specialty. And so anyway, so we were coaching on it. She's like, what am I going to do? I'm supposed to start this in 2 weeks, and I don't even have a group. Like, how do I give up? And I said, well, how many of these people on your list are you close enough to that actually know you and have a relationship with you, that would just take a call from you? And she's like, oh, well, half of them. I'm like, great. So let's try this. Let's come up with 3 questions that you can ask them about their relationships that speak to what you would actually be doing in this time together. And so we spent a little bit of time on the phone, developed those 3 questions to identify, to really open up and invite someone to think about what's going on in their relationship. So the question isn't, hey, you want to do a relationship seminar? No, I'm kind of busy. I got stuff going on right now. The question was like, what's going on in your life? Like, what's going on with your spouse right now? What's happening with you? Oh, well. And so about a week later, she called me back and said, hey, my thing is full. Like 90%, everybody but one said they can do it. And the other one that couldn't had a conflict, because they discovered in the conversation, the invitation to think about these things, recognizing, oh, they do have some needs. There are some things going on. And then suddenly the proposition for what was going to happen in this like seminar, this coached experience, suddenly had value emerged out of that invitation to think about something. And questions engage the brain differently. And so it's like, if people, salespeople and even leaders shift to what's the best question that I could ask that will open up a dialogue and open something up for the client, for this conversation, for where our value brings it, is like worth 10 times the memorization of features and benefits and even, social proven examples of extraordinary work that we've had. If the perception of value isn't present for the buyer sitting there, all that stuff really has limited influence.
Beautifully said. Yeah, the value is always in the buyer, not in what we can say, right? That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Nancy, you also, obviously have worked with a number of salespeople that, come into your organization. What are some, do you have a one you could share about a light bulb going off and an impact, or how has it had you, or you could speak to the effect this has had on your entire approach and Envision's approach to engaging buyers?
I tell you, just a light bulb moment for almost anyone that in our swim lane of the industry is pretty rough and tumble. We've talked about that. My history prior to Envision, other companies I've worked for were, short-term focused, right? And shareholder only focused, right? Or priority, which then puts in so many mechanisms to drive behavior, manipulate behavior of the employees, right? Bonus plans that don't make sense, that just, and coming to what we wanted to do as a co-owner of Envision is the opposite of all of that. And we have been truly the anomaly in the industry. So I think the light bulb moments, I'll tell you, David, is when folks interview with us and, just to watch them go, really?
Yeah.
You don't have monthly commit calls, right? Or there are different what? Really? Just the whole light bulb of, I don't get it. It's kind of funny just because our complete business is operationalized almost on its head compared to the companies and our other companies in our swim lane of technology. That's just what's funny. I don't need fly swatters, right? Because we have people just agape every time that they come in. So, their stories were so inspirational. I could tell them all day long, but I think we have more questions that I'd love to, I want to time check. How are we doing? So we get to.
We have plenty of time. I've got another 15 minutes before we open it up. We're already getting questions from the audience anyway, so we'll probably pepper those in. But one of the things I'm hearing you say is in that engagement with the salesperson, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm trusting you. You're a professional. You're coming in here. If we get and ignite you in the right way around purpose, we don't have to push you around numbers or targets or as much around that, because you're going to be motivated yourself from a point of view of purpose and being part of an organization like that.
Well, I might clarify just a little bit there.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things, at least from my observation, and yes, I'm an old dog in this industry. I've worked with a lot of salespeople through my years. Is I think that one of the biggest things with a sales professional is self-awareness, right? For that person to understand their intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, right? That's the first. And for us, first and foremost, it's someone who's authentically inspired, intrinsically motivated by our purpose, right? And then purpose beyond that they can find in their own performance that's important to them, that is still serving our stakeholders with authenticity, all of our stakeholders with authenticity and benefit, right? I think that's one that's really important. But then, beyond that, how is that person to recognize, how is that person additionally motivated? Right? Is it external accountability? Is it only internal accountability? Right? Because I've worked with some reps. I've had the privilege of working with some reps that say, no, I need external accountability. I need you to hold me accountable, or I really need to race, healthy competition, right? Healthy competition or race towards an objective that kind of reminds me to keep going, right? Because they could otherwise rest on, I've had a great success, it's filled my cup and, of fulfillment, and I'm done, but then they want to keep going and help more people, right? So I think it's really important around self-awareness and understanding one's own motivations, and then comprising comp or recognition or whatever it is that's most important for that person, because we are all different. Lisa, what were you going to say?
Well, I'm glad you brought that out, because there's this feeling sort of in the purpose space, but not with salespeople, but just people in the purpose space. Oh, you set the purpose, and then you don't have to measure the sales. Yeah, you still have sales targets. You still remind people of the sales targets. And I'm old line sales. I'm like ex-Procter & Gamble, like, what's the number? And we often create this false dichotomy. Again, if you were curing cancer, you'd measure how many patients you cured. So you do want to measure. And to Nancy's point, what you understand though with your whole team is that the money is a lagging indicator. Right. It's a lagging indicator. And someone asked a question, Shannon, here about what are some leading indicators, what you're measuring on a daily basis. You're measuring the money because that's the report card, that's the lagging indicator. But what you're looking at on a daily basis is the behaviors, and it's how engaged they are with customers. Because if you've got a seller, and I do want to make the point, people are complex. You can be motivated by purpose and money at the same time. And if you're trying to make rent, I mean, I wrote Selling with Noble Purpose to sell my family coming out of a bankruptcy, not sell my family, but get my family out of a bankruptcy. So I can assure you that money was there. And so if you've got people that are struggling financially, money is okay to have it be a motivator. The challenge is what you've got to do is if they're just only thinking about the money, they're going to exhibit all those graspy, terrible sales behaviors that we hate. So you've got to quiet it and say, I know you want to make money. And I tell you how we do that. That's by making a difference to customers. So let's quiet that little money monster that's super afraid and let's lean into something bigger. Because human beings, once we get past food and shelter, we have two fundamental needs, belonging and significance. We want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, belong, and we want to know that our part matters. And so what we're seeing now in this situation where all the sellers went home, the customers sort of shut their doors, and now they're opening back up virtually, is the seller needs to understand that what you're doing, and Jason said it, is like, what I do is valuable. Like it has a sense of urgency. Because right now, as a leader, you're competing with the kids are at the kitchen table. The customers are saying, no, like people better care and think that what they're doing is valuable, or they're not going to be engaged.
Right.
Yeah, they're not going to be effective. Elizabeth, it looks like you were going to make a comment.
Gonna elaborate on that and get super specific with Shannon on best practices for leading indicators. Some of the most effective leading indicators we've seen work are breadth of customer intelligence. When someone is embodying this approach, they will have much more customer intelligence, not purchasing requirements, but true customer intelligence around the strategic goals of the organization. We also see an increase in call time. They spend longer on the phone with these people. Their close rate will go up. They are more engaged in their own work. They actually perform administrative tasks faster, like filling out expense reports and pipeline reports. So all of those things are some leading indicators to how fully engaged is this person in the sales process and in the larger purpose of our organization, just to be super granular there.
Yeah, it's
And
very
you
helpful.
can measure those. That was one of the things we did in Selling with Noble Purpose in the second edition, was really get granular. I had one client tell me my favorite part of that book was the appendix, because it's like super granular on if you measure these 10 things, and I don't mean like over measure. Some of them are qualitative, some of them are observable behaviors. But if you look at these 10 things, some of which Elizabeth just mentioned, that gives you the read on how successful your salespeople are going to be and enables you to course correct before you find out, as one sales leader told me, I think half our sales force quit last year, only they forgot to tell us. So you don't want that to happen.
And one thing
Go ahead, Nancy.
I'll go to Jason, but just one thing I'll also quickly add is, when I was telling you earlier, and we all did a little bit about the qualifying process, right? If reps are doing that, in depth, and truly doing it with clear glasses, not rose-colored glasses, right? And asking, 3-layer depth questions and really collaboratively with the client, identifying and defining and clarifying, needs, requirements, objectives, and preferences, right? If they're doing that really effectively, then your products or services can indeed meet those needs, right? Again, take off the rose-colored glasses. If they can actually make an impact and the customer does, is better having done business with this, with the organization than not, then afterwards you're going to have a delighted client, right? And your customer sat numbers will be great. I think that's effective qualifying and, effectively selling and then delivering, of course, you have to deliver on it, right? But only deliver within what you can deliver on, right? Then you have customer sat. I'm pleased with Envision. Our customer sat is 99.7% awesome. Clients can either say, awesome, good, or bad. And we have a 99.7% awesome rating. And that, that's part of that. That's attributable to every employee at Envision, but it starts with the sales process. So Jason, what were you going to say?
I just wanted to add one thing that I think that I haven't heard yet in the conversation that we're having about purpose, and Elizabeth and Lisa include this in the book as well. And I think it's really important to point out is that when the purpose is articulated and clear and present in the person, that there are behaviors that change, like that changes automatically without training, without rigorous memorization, without dance on your head and wear a cup and all that stuff or whatever. It changes how the person shows up, it approaches, and how the buyer experiences them when they're coming from a place of purpose, one that's like clear and that they're connected to. It automatically shifts those behaviors to be more positive, more warm, more trusting, more open, like all the things that you want, that you couldn't train into a person. This is like, you want a way to bypass? Everybody's looking for what's the quick bypass to get the sale and increase these numbers, right? It's like getting people connected is a bypass, because it actually then starts shifting how people show up for other people, both in business and in personal life. You're like all the way around. It's a natural human tendency. The intention is set. How you unconsciously behave starts to shift and show up.
Oh, yeah, and I think this speaks to another question that showed up around personalities and sales. But I want to go to another and a deeper cut on that question, which is there a new kind of individual, or is there some special qualities of an individual that meets this more purpose-driven, adaptive conversation approach? And are there some that may fall off over time that might be defining other professions? I'm just curious about, how do you select, how do you look for, what are the key qualities of an individual that maps to this model? Of course, as human beings, what Jason just spoke to is when something awakens in us and we get connected to something, the consciousness and the way the organ being operates is different, but we have to sort for that as well. And is this person ready to make that jump? So if you could speak to that, maybe you could start, Elizabeth, or with your thoughts on that, and we can move to Nancy from there.
Sure. I certainly don't think there is necessarily a personality type that is predisposed to this. We know that human beings beyond food and shelter all crave belonging and significance. That said, there are some folks who have more open ears than others. The challenge is the narrative of business has often taught us, and this is what we open this conversation with, that that's not really important. And when you're in a sales interview, you should be talking about your demonstrated success in the past, your black book of contacts, how you've addressed competitive threats, and that this notion of purpose is something that is not necessarily relevant to an interviewing conversation. We're certainly seeing that shift as organizations start asking about internal drivers. I would just add to that, don't be surprised if someone is uncomfortable. That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have the potential to be a purpose-driven seller. It just means they've probably been operating in a transactional space for some time.
Great, thank you.
Now, we're also seeing, though, especially with younger people, so people my age were raised to believe that you should take money as a substitute, and you sort of did your thing and maybe one day you'll get promoted. But we are seeing with younger people, when they come to the interview and say, I was so excited about your purpose, and you ask, what does that mean to you? And they tell you, don't let that person leave. That's the person that you want, because all the data tells us if they are both purposeful and passionate, and those are two different things, actually. If they have both of those things, they'll be in the top 10%. So you're looking for people. And one of the things that we've had some of our clients do is pre-interview. One of the interview requirements is we ask that you go on our website and look at our purpose and come prepared to the interview to discuss why this may or may not be interesting to you.
Right.
That'll suss them out right there.
Yeah,
Jason.
Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
No, I was saying, Jason, please go ahead.
I was just going to say the one thing about like in the program that I do to develop the competency around the sales conversation, the biggest barrier that I see that I come up against is our natural conditioning, because at least I can only speak to American culture in the Midwest that I grew up in, right? And the conditioning all in education and growing up is the most important person in the room is the one talking. And the one who has the most value is the one that gets to talk. and gets to talk the most. And there is a natural conditioning in our culture to that, right? And so what do? We practice our ability to articulate and pitch and share, and how we speak is really important. That shows up when I talk to people considering working with me, they're like, so tell me what to say so I can get the deal, right? And so I think a big challenge for all personalities like going into sales and taking this approach is to park the talking. You have to be able to be articulate. That's clear. I'm not saying that, but what needs to move forward is your listening and understanding and inquiry skills need to rise tremendously. And this is not a strong muscle. There's nowhere that we have been taught anywhere that says you need to really listen and ask good questions. This is not something that is really common. So it creates an opportunity to be like, this is something that's just going to be needed to overcome, because we default to what we know the best. Especially if we're in a high pressure conversation, like any sales conversation, and the pressure comes on, we're going to default to what we're most comfortable in. And so it takes practice to be able to shift and flip that. Some are naturally going to be more better at it than others, but on a whole, like culturally, we're way more oriented toward like, oh, let me give you my talk, let me give you my spiel, rather than let me really understand like what's going on with this, and then I'll share some things that actually will be really poignant and relevant.
I'll riff off that. We have over the years we've said resist the itch to pitch, right?
Yeah.
but
Good. I like that.
With regards to the personalities or what makes a noble seller, right? And again, keeping in mind the organization first and foremost has to support that, right? It has to be built in a way that has to be able to support that as well. But I think emotional intelligence, part of which of that is self-awareness, right? But other awareness as well, authenticity, and then riffing off what Jason said, the growth mindset. Being able to change behaviors, being able to evolve, being able to learn, and not just say, oh, what I did before was wrong. No, you're evolving. There's not right and wrong, right? Rumi, beyond the field of right and wrong, we'll meet you on the field beyond it, right? And really folks that can evolve and grow, because there is no checkbox, there is no finish line. We're always all growing. We're always all evolving. We're always all learning. And then I would recommend every leader of every organization read Leading with Noble Purpose by Lisa McLeod, and then Selling with Noble Purpose by Lisa and Elizabeth, and then Hiring the Coaching Hour to actually work with your sales teams as well, and Lisa and Elizabeth to help put that, execute on a methodology. But first, get the right people on the bus, right? Get folks that have those intrinsic traits and interests and authenticity, as I'd mentioned, emotional intelligence, growth mindset, those types of things, and then put them to noble work.
Great. Yeah, and a final question to wrap this up, and anything else you want to say to feel that you're complete in saying everything you want to say about this important topic, which is, are you starting, sales is lagged behind, and I think Lisa, you mentioned at the beginning of organization, and Elizabeth around purpose. Are you noticing that in the current environment they're in, that there is a shift, and what are you seeing in that shift that is shifting sales organizations to realize, have the enlightenment moment to see that this is an approach that is more effective?
Well, there are two things happening right now, and I want to address, there's a question in the chat, in the Q&A that links to this.
Okay, great.
There's two things happening right now. One is that the reason sales organizations are leaning into this is salespeople all over the world, just like everyone else, are having this esoteric moment where they're saying, who am I? Why am I here? What is my value in the world, in my life, in my work? If you've ever lost a parent or been through a health scare, it's this reset for you. And that's happening to everyone right now. And so organizations recognize, if I don't have the hearts and minds of my sellers, I'm dead. And then the second thing that is happening is customers are saying, are you here to help me? Are you just here to close me? And so, as Elizabeth said earlier, reputations are being won and lost based on perceived intent. And so while organizations have started declaring a purpose at a high level, What I often say is sales is the litmus test of your purpose.
Yes.
If you're not living it in the sales, it's not authentic, and you're missing out on all the benefits. And this person here is asked in the chat, what if your organization does not have a clear purpose? Do you have to figure it out on your own by understanding what value you provide clients? And the answer is, you can do this. You don't have to wait. If you are a single seller, if you are a sales manager, if you're the VP of sales and you think you work for some transactional boss, you may or may not. They may just be trained in the old way, but you don't have to wait. If you're selling something, you're making a difference or people want to be buying it. So if you want to figure out how do you make a difference to clients and bring that to the fore of what you were doing, you'll be more successful and you'll be happier. So we are seeing a push towards this. And it is those dual pillars of employees wanted, like this person in the chat, and customers are saying, I'm not letting you in the door if you aren't clear about how you're going to help me.
Yeah, I think also as you do that, you're going to go up on the ladders of effectiveness in sales organization. And then you're going to be able to pick, if this company doesn't change, you'll be able to pick your next opportunity as a salesperson. So that's also important. Yeah.
That's exactly right. You'll be the one that I go, this one person said they had this story in their heart, and they go, well, she's our top salesperson. We better listen.
That's right.
And if for some reason the organization stunts that, right, just don't compromise your personal brand, right?
Yeah.
Don't compromise your integrity or your personal brand. And then you will, to Lisa's point, go to an employer that values your contributions. Yeah.
Any final comments, Jason or Elizabeth? You want to speak to that?
Jason, who has politely waited through many of the questions while we answered first. How about you? You take this one.
I'm sorry. Did you direct that to me? I don't know. I've heard so much good stuff in what we've really covered and talked about today. And I guess rather than adding anything, I really kind of feel like, in summary, that just we've seen the proof, and I think everyone has experienced it personally, that when you're connected to something that really matters and that you feel like it really matters, the ability to go out and convey the value of it to somebody else is a bajillion times easier. And if there's one thing, a motivation, talk about what motivates salespeople, I really believe that salespeople are motivated by having a job that's enjoyable, makes a difference, and is fun to do. And if it makes really great money too, bonus, right? And so I feel like what I've heard tonight in the conversation is, here are some pathways, here are some ideas, here are some tools, here's a means by which to really create a great environment for people to go out and enthusiastically, celebrate the difference that your company is making, selling, doing in the world. And everyone will be happier as a result.
Right. Very good. Thank you. Nancy, any final words from you?
No, just gratitude to have listened and learned from these professionals. It's just so enriching and I feel so grateful. So thank you for allowing me to participate, but really absorb everything that these professionals and these leaders in the selling industry have brought to us.
It was a very rich experience. Thank you all. And I want to offer another opportunity for anybody else who would like to ask a question. You got a few more minutes here. If you'd like to ask a question, feel free to do so in the question and answer box, and we'll get to that. And I want to thank the panelists for being ahead of me at getting to those questions. I appreciate your support and helping me be a better moderator tonight. Thank you.
David,
Yeah.
There's a survey after this where folks have an opportunity to enter to win a book, right? And then also Jason's white paper. Can you talk about those things?
Yeah, I was going to say that in closing comments. So we basically will be having Conscious Capitalism Twin Cities is going to be getting together to have a leadership committee. This is our last program of 2020. We haven't started to develop 2021 yet. So we want to hear from our members and people that are involved in the community to fill out a survey to give us your ideas and thoughts on what you think you'd like to see us present next year in programming. And part of the value of filling out the survey is you'll be entered into a drawing. The drawing will be Selling with Noble Purpose will be one of the books, and Rehumanizing the Workplace will be the other book that was shown by Elizabeth. Thank you. for that. And so if you fill out the survey, and that link will be coming up after the program, you'll be entered in that drawing, and then we have an opportunity to get those books. But I would invite everybody to read those books. I read the Selling with No Purpose. In addition, Jason has been really kind to offer his white paper that will be automatically sent out to everybody that's signed up for this program, and you'll be able to see the nuts and bolts of what he has created, which is pretty stellar. I've had a good fortune of working with him for some time, and it's really, really profound work. So that'll be coming as well. And we want to, so if there's any other, I want to just make sure if there's any other questions for anybody.
I'd like to ask a question.
Sure.
Of the participants. I guess the question that I would ask them to mull over in their heads is if they could, great if they can scale it, great if they're the CEO, but what would it feel like if every single day you woke up knowing that there were customers out there who needed you? Like, what would that be like if you woke up every single day knowing that you had something incredibly valuable and that customers needed you? Like, what would that feel like for you? We've talked about all the economics, but I can't be the only one that wakes up some days and looks at all the Zoom calls and goes, here we go, time to make the donuts, and just what would that feel like if you could wake up every day and think about that? What would it do for you? That would be the question that I would leave folks with.
It's a beautiful question.
Put your answer in the chat if you're feeling real vulnerable, or just think it over.
Yeah,
I do want to offer a note on that vulnerability component. If you're sitting here thinking, well, this feels a little soft, this is kind of mushy, I don't know how comfortable I am talking about my feelings. Know that the Salesforce State of Sales reported this year that 78% of buyers want trusted advisors who truly understand them. The lane is wide open for you, and the data is at your back, validating that this approach does result in all of those quantitative metrics that all of us care deeply about. So if it's a little bit uncomfortable, I would suggest to folks push through that, because the growth on the other side is tremendous.
beautifully said. Yeah, great. Well, thank you, everybody. And I thank our panelists. It was a great evening, really rich, something to watch over and over again to get more and more value from. And we want to again thank our sponsors for supporting this event. We couldn't do this without you. And if you found value and want to learn more how to become a sponsor or a member again, please reach out to any of us in the leadership team or go to our website. And in the meantime, we wish you a very happy and safe holiday season. And we want to thank you again for being here tonight. Again, thank the panelists.